Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Venture Stories by Village Global. I'm here today with two very special guests, repeat guest and fan favorite, Brian Frank, network leader at Village Global and founder and partner at FTW, and Rob Rhinehart, founder Soylent and general partner at Mars Bio. Rob, Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us here.
Let's dive right in. You guys both have your own funds. Why don't you talk about your investment thesis, where you are investing, where you're not investing, where you're excited about? Rob, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Our investment thesis, I think, is driven by confidence in biology being the next golden age. You know, we've seen humanity be transformed by hardware, software, aviation, aerospace, and we really think that biology is now the science that is affecting every industry. So we invest across life sciences and biotech. We definitely look at therapeutics, especially exciting next generation therapeutics and devices. We're also very excited about synthetic biology, biomanufacturing, and consumer products made through biological techniques, and especially a lot of exciting innovation in the agriculture and food space, which I would love to dive more into today.
Cool.
And we at FTW Ventures focus on innovations for the food system. And so our thesis is pretty simple. We believe the food system needs to be reinvented to scale to feed 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. And current practices will not meet our needs, both in their productivity, capabilities, and ability to feed people the nutrition that they need to sustain themselves for a healthy and happy life. And so, like Rob, we also invest in biotechnologies and synthetic biology and computational biology, as well as genetics, genetic research and genetic work, as well as metabolism and gut health. On top of that, we also look at investments in hardware and automation because we have severe challenges with getting the products out of our farms and producing them in new and novel ways with new technologies that require big fermentation tanks or other hardware or piece of automation equipment, as well as we invest in software and SaaS, which is the underpinning of every industry to, plan better, predict better, and analyze their output. And finally, we also do novel products and ingredients. We'll talk a little bit about some of those companies in our portfolio that are really exciting in those spaces, but we're seeing a revolution in terms of plant-based eating and new forms of protein and other macronutrients that can help sustain the planet.
I'm curious if we can make sort of a little bit of market map in terms of where you guys are most excited. Like what's on your request for startups, so to speak? Where do you want to see more innovation, more startups happening, or where do you think that is going to be much bigger than what it is right now in terms of startup activity?
Yeah, I think one of the areas, and I think Rob and I probably pretty much agree on this one, which is new and novel ways to create the basis of the food that we eat in ways that can be sustainably produced, profitably produced, and can scale with the needs across the world. And so we're seeing specifically in fermentation, we're seeing a whole revolution of new high-value products that are being created through this age-old phenomenon of growing things where a yeast or bacteria eat one substance and spit out another. And so there's a lot of opportunity in that space to grow a number of high-value products. I would say for FTW going beyond that, it's just the idea of deep sciences and deep tech playing a much broader role within the food system. These are all traditional industries that have become fat and happy on, the revenues that they've been seeing to date. But now the major companies in these spaces are being hammered by the realities of the world. Consumers don't necessarily want their products produced in those ways. They're not giving them the nutrients that they need, and they're not able to scale to meet demands of the future generations. And so, anywhere that deep tech can help solve for those challenges, either as new and novel companies that start off with the potential of growing a whole massive industry behind them. I mean, we can just take Beyond Meat as an example, right? Has basically put plant-based eating in the zeitgeist of the world by having this massive, IPO success, to things that will simply increase productivity and enhance the aspects of the food system that we need to increase, through the use of these sciences.
I agree. And I see two really exciting capabilities that are new and we should take advantage of. One is that for the, global macros and for the nutrition, that is necessary to feed humanity, we can make the same things in new and better and more efficient and more sustainable ways. The other trend that frankly I think more people should be looking at is the capabilities to make entirely new things. Most of the things we eat today were not what people were eating thousands of years ago. New food products do come on the market. New sources of protein, carbohydrates, fats, come on the market. And I think we should both be looking at better ways to make what exists and also what is now possible to make that was not possible before. And I think this is even bigger than food. This applies to all materials. Everything that we have at some point comes from the earth. And I think that it's really exciting that we can push the envelope in terms of what material properties are possible, whether they confer a benefit to food or a new type of plastic or a new type of fiber for construction or thread. I think we should be focusing a lot more on what new things we can make, in addition to better ways to make existing products.
I think that's a great topic. One of the areas that you and I haven't gone into yet was edible packaging or bio peels that can go over fruits, vegetables, and products. And it's like we've been living in this plastics world for so long. We've assumed that that's how it has to work. Everything gets wrapped in a plastic sheath and then gets sold, at market and stuff like that. But you've got Appeal Sciences, and Cambridge Crops and other people that are, trying to create these edible, skins. And it's a new way to package products, right? And to prevent mold and other things. So I don't know what your thoughts are on kind of the bios for materials, specifically in the food industry, like some of the areas we should be going into.
Food packaging is a very exciting market because it's very challenging. You need something that's very consistent. There are health concerns on the line if the product doesn't work as designed, and there's also enormous cost pressure. But if you get something right, the market is enormous. These are products that are, all around us. They're used by a lot of people every day. So if you do break in, the market is enormous.
Yeah. I was, through another program, I was advising a company called Lollyware, and they're making straws, using seaweed as their initial feedstock, but they were thinking well beyond that. Like, what is the future of plastics products, and how do we make them either edible or biodegradable? And again, this is where science really excels, is unlocking those potentials and those opportunities when we had originally assumed it just comes from the chemicals that we make today in the same way. And so we're looking at chemical production and removing chemicals and making things naturally, but we're making them in new and novel ways. And I think that that's the most exciting thing, is when you start thinking, okay, we don't have to accept 100 years of tradition of how the product industry has done this. And then you get these founders that are just going off the wall with the things that they want to make using biosciences, right? And that's what I think gets Rob and I really excited.
We also don't have to get rid of plastics. Why don't we just dive into the problems with plastics and fix those? You can make plastic out of any oil. You can make oil out of algae. You can make plastics without petroleum. And I think that is on the verge of happening.
And I think that brings up another topic that I'd love to dive into, which is where traditional agriculture and deep science and genetic modification, play a commensurate role, or do they play an antagonistic role? Meaning, are we trying to replace everything with GMOs or with scientific manipulation, or should we also be trying to make the traditional manufacturing or processes better using science? And I know that that's we talked about this before
why not both?
Yeah, exactly. And so can you do GMOs and plant breeding simultaneously to produce great products? And should you be using those in concert?
It might be fun to talk for a minute about the specifics of, plant breeding and how to modify plant genetics. What's the best way? What are some of the different ways, and what are the different trade-offs? For example, I have a plant that does this. I want it to do something different. Let's say I want to make a plant glow red. Why not? Let's have some fun. So let's say you're going to take a gene called, RFP, a red fluorescent protein, and you want to put that in the plant. First, where are we going to get that gene? You can't just kind of rub it on the leaves and make sure it's going to get in there. You want to insert it more precisely. And for a long time, a common way of doing that was literally a gene gun that has used compressed air to and would put genes on particles of metal and shoot them at very high velocity into the cells. And so the cell wall of plants are very rigid or very tough. And these particles would get into the cell, but as you can imagine, there's enormous collateral damage. Most of the cells just up and die. Those that take the gene may not take it up and start using it. So over the years, we've developed more and more precise methods. I've seen algae engineers focus on the chloroplast instead of the nuclear genome, something easier to target. CRISPR, of course, is something that's being more commonly used in plant genetics. A technology that I'm particularly interested in is agrobacterium. So agrobacterium, if you ever see a lump on the side of a tree, that's an infection. And it's these bacteria that have become very astute at inserting, essentially viral DNA or plasmid into plant cells. Not too different from CRISPR. We basically hijacked an infection, or immune, system concept from these single-celled organisms. So this agrobacterium, they can insert their gene through the plant cell wall, but it gets integrated somewhat randomly. And so I think a very exciting idea would be to take the kind of insertion precision and efficiency. Agrobacterium are incredibly efficient. You shoot something with a gene gun, maybe 0.1% of your cells are actually going to be effectively transformed. And even then, where is it going to end up in the genome? And is it going to express, it's a lot of brute force and trial and error. Agrobacterium, it's more like a sniper rifle. You get in, but how that problem remains after you get in, where in the genome are you going to integrate? That's an issue. And so I think it would be exciting to, kind of combine the efficiency of agrobacterium with the precision of CRISPR-Cas9 and have this kind of really precision, plant genome editing tool.
Yeah, for the scientists that aren't, for the non-scientists listening to this podcast, CRISPR is basically a digital scissor that allows you to snip out sequences in the DNA that allow you to be very precise about traits that you want to change within a plant. But deciding where to do that is one of the big benefits of CRISPR, is finding those locations under which those properties, like the browning of an apple, and like the cosmic crisp apple is a good example. We just now have a product that has been CRISPR modified to remove the browning gene. And so, like you say, like there's this amazing technology that's relatively newly discovered that is probably one of the biggest scientific breakthroughs in the last 20 years. I think the lab that developed it was up for some prizes and things like that. And so we see a lot of things just on the horizon. And now the question is, where do we as a culture and we as investors really want to spend our time, energy, money? I think the investors, and I'm going to make a guess here, the investors are probably a little ahead of where culture and the community and the general public want to be looking at these things. I think this was always a challenge, with Soylent and how Soylent was marketed as pro-GMO, right? And so how do we change that perception, or how do we improve the perception of science to make better food is just continuing on with what we've always done in history? When we applied fire, we changed the properties of food. But I think that hasn't yet permeated into the cultural norm, right? In terms of what people really think about putting in their body.
Well, maybe that's because we haven't yet gotten to the point where we've used this technology to make products that are better enough to get people to really pay attention. Once you started using fire in cooking, I wonder if it even really tasted better. Maybe that's an evolved response, but what it definitely did was make the food safer.
Yeah.
So people that ate cooked food, they would survive. That's a very easy one. And then maybe
it also
over time,
converted things that weren't edible into edible because it broke down the cell bonds. And right. And so you have a lot of things that we've taken for granted that are natural processes. And I use air quotes, and I know you can't really hear that on a podcast. So that's why I'm saying it. But we've been doing this for so long. I think that, we're now making massive leaps forward. And I'm wondering how we bring consumers along with it. Cause I worry not just about the innovation in science and forming that. I also want the consumers to want that and demand it and desire it. And I think the number one thing that we always look for is it a desirable product? Is it tasty? Is it 10 times better than what's on the market? Is it 10 times more efficient? 100 times more efficient in some cases.
Yeah. You don't want to be a solution looking for a problem.
That's right.
Let's say you burn millions of dollars making basil that glows red. Did anyone really want that product? Did anyone really ask for that product? Now, at the same time, most consumers don't know what science has made possible. And so, until you get to the market a little bit and until you start getting some consumer feedback, maybe you were wrong about what the best part of your product was. Maybe you were wrong about who your initial customer was. That's why I think it's really important to get to the market earlier. And that's why I think that now is a great time for biology, because you don't need $1 billion lab and you don't need to be a giant biotech company to make something. There's this incredible biohacker movement of people working in sheds and in kitchens and garages. And, you can buy tools off the internet for, the cost of a nice dinner and make something that used to take a multi-million-dollar research lab. And people are doing this, and it's really exciting.
Does the AWS for that exist yet?
Not quite. I will give a shout out to one of my favorite sites, the Odin. It definitely has, its detractors, but I think in general, more energy behind this hacker movement, is good. You don't necessarily need a PhD in biology. Certainly helps, but, it's not in the reach of everybody. And, a brain is a brain. Like you can learn anything, and maybe you're a little smarter and more capable than you initially thought. You never really know until you try. And the downside of trying to do some of these biohacker experiments is very, very low. No matter what, you're going to learn something, and you're probably not out a lot of time, and you're probably not out a lot of money, and you'd probably be surprised that all you might need is the kitchen that you already have.
If we break down what you meant by AWS for this industry, I think there's a number of different things like AWS supplies that we need to discuss and we need to talk about. One is the infrastructure on which to run best practices and to run at scale, right? I'd say, again, going back to, I think, Rob and our equal interest in fermentation, there is really yet to be at scale fermentation of high value proteins and things like that, specifically for certain food related initiatives. There's a ton of work going on in that space, and there's a ton of companies that are trying to get into that space. I'll give a shout out to one of my companies, Geltor, which does collagen and gelatin through fermentation, doing it in the cosmetic space, but always had an intention to want to go into food products. The problem is doing it at a commodity price point, right? And getting it to scale. And so the infrastructure doesn't necessarily exist. I mean, the amazing thing is the fermenters exist, but they happen to be in breweries. So like AB InBev and Miller Coors probably have some of the largest quantity of fermentation capacity, but they're using it to brew beer, or in some cases kombucha actually too. But they have really yet not gotten in the space. We're starting to see all these biomanufacturing facilities worldwide now go like, oh my gosh, there's so many other things we can use this infrastructure for. And maybe there's extra downstream processing that they need to add on, but they want to innovate in that direction. So I'm starting to see inklings, and I don't know if you are, of people trying to innovate in that pathway. I think one good shout out that we both know is Will Patrick and the Culture Biosciences guys that are building strain development. And so at scale, you can do multiple different strain development tests and then select a strain that then can go into larger scale fermenters. And so there's an industry now being built for the infrastructure. The other thing is frameworks. And so when you think about AWS, right, it's like, oh, I want to build a IoT button that does X. Well, they give you the framework to get started with and then run it on their hardware and stuff like that. I think that gets to be harder because currently all the best knowledge is locked either in labs or in large manufacturers of other products. And we're just starting to see the diaspora of founders leaving these great labs and leaving these large corporates going like, I think we can do more than making, a chemical replacement for tire additives or something like that. And they're going, I actually want to do something bigger and better for the world. And so I want to go into the food industry. And so, I was recently down at, an amazing microfermentation workshop where like all these big labs and I was talking to all these big facilities like DuPont and CP Kelco and things like that make a ton of products and ingredients. And they're all like, well, we want to do more. Like we're inspired by startup culture, like going fast and breaking things in this space. And so how do we get involved in that innovation? So there's more and more of these companies showing up in Silicon Valley. And there's more and more of these companies going to startups and going, we want to partner with you. Now, my question is, do they want to partner because they want to ingest that knowledge and take it in and make the bigger company stronger? Or do they actually want to bring knowledge out of their walls to actually grow a startup community that will then build more better products and maybe acquisition targets for them down the road?
Yeah. And also maybe to these bigger companies, please decide on a strategy before spending a lot of time with the founders. We see this a lot where all these big companies are, oh, we're really excited about this area. And, they have this big name behind them. So all the founders want to talk to them, but then there's no follow up. They just, and I don't think it's, malicious. I don't think they're trying to steal their IP. I think they just are, don't really know what to do. And, there's a lot of very specific ways that large companies can help, financing, incubators through investments or grants, accelerators, corporate venture programs that do a mix of, direct investments and LP positions. I think that works great.
Or just let your scientists spend some time helping scale up a small startup and stuff like that. There's so much knowledge and expertise.
If you sign a deal with a startup, please give them some cash. They really need it. Yeah. I just see a lot of these big companies that, frankly waste a lot of founders' time because they haven't really figured out their strategy or they have to get through 7 layers of bureaucracy. And, I have some sympathy for that, but, please get through the bureaucracy first and then decide on a strategy and then go and execute because there's a lot of value to be gained, by these big companies. But I think there's some really specific ways to do that. And if you're just interested in an area, decide on a strategy before talking to the founders.
Well, I think they realize that fundamentally they're behind in innovation. And the guys in the startup with 2 guys or 2 girls in a garage, sciencing the shit out of this stuff is going to move faster and break things and find new pathways than they ever could with all their bureaucracy and the talent that's locked up, but the bureaucracy and I would say the number one thing is always the inability to fail. Like Founders love to fail because they learn something every time they fail, and then they move forward to the next stage, which ideally leads them to a massive success. Yeah. In corporations, you don't have that luxury. And so they're looking at startups going like, hey, this is our way to learn. And I think you're right. It's a bad way to learn because you're wasting someone else's time. But they realize that they need that knowledge, expertise, and focus on these specific problems.
And the startups need the big companies. They need to know how things work at a big scale, and big companies are really good at polishing and professionalizing and distributing. And these are something that the startups are not good at. So I definitely think that there's a mutually beneficial way to work together.
How do you see the relationship between startups and incumbents changing in the next 10 years? Like in terms of the power dynamics in the industry, like, the opportunities for startups relative to incumbents. How do you see that play out?
In this industry, it's a rising tide. I think the startups are going to do great. I think the big established players are going to do great. I think just focusing on this area and being patient and taking risks, and being a little open-minded about, what your next, vertical might be to the big companies, and to the founders being open-minded, about, talking to these big companies. There's, other than the time, there's little downside, help them out too. But I think, this is just a really exciting time for this area. And I think it's going to be a win-win.
I think there's a couple different things that I look at, and there's a historical perspective that I want to bring to this discussion. One is I agree with Rob that they should be financiers. If they realize that there is innovation challenges at their organizations, they should leverage the startup community to find that innovation and then to ultimately bring that stuff in-house. And so traditionally, in most exit cases, startups end up getting acquired by big companies or by PE. It's a very narrow pipeline of people that actually get to IPO and stuff like that. So I see them as the granddaddies of this industry that can help this industry grow and then potentially reap the benefit by bringing in, multi-hundreds of millions of dollars of acquisition that can then extend them into new lines of business or change their organization or fundamentally change the DNA of their company in the long run. I think Tyson Ventures is one of my examples of doing this very well, which is getting involved in the plant-based community, rebranding the company not as a traditional meat company, but as a protein company. And so they've made the steps and they've started putting money on the other side of the table, whereas they have been a traditional meat provider. But then I look at the other side of the coin, which is we had this run in the 2000s when the mobile industry took off. And you had all of these big corporations show up in Silicon Valley, set up offices, set up CVC arms. I mean, you could run up and down 101 and all the major telcos had either some CVC arm or some incubation or acceleration house. How many of those are left? It's like SoftBank and actually Orange France Telecom still has an office here in the city. And they all retreated because they didn't realize what their role to play was in the ecosystem and how to effectively do that. They thought if they send their CXOs to Silicon Valley one time every, 6 months, maybe a year, that they would suck up all this innovation. And I don't think that's how it happens. You actually have to be participatory and you have to be a little humble. And I think it's hard for big executives that are making their multi-million-dollar salaries to be humble that some kid coming out of Stanford or Berkeley or UC Davis or UC Irvine, right, or Riverside, is going to have some knowledge or expertise that's going to energize their company or energize them. And so that's whenever we meet these big companies is you have to be humble enough to have that conversation that someone could literally walk in and change your business. Because you know what? Not everybody can spot in Elon Musk or Travis Kalanick day one. You just have to be open to it. And that's the first job of that.
And even if they don't, they're probably going to learn something.
That's right.
I think there's very little downside, for a corporation to just carve off an enormous amount of capital. It doesn't take a lot to make a difference in the startup industry. That's one reason why it's so great. Corporate VC can work really well. There's some really great corporate VCs out there. You don't have to be as big as a SoftBank. There's definitely some small corporate VCs, especially in the food and ag space, that really make an impact. And some of them are really good at what they do. It's just like a business, just like a venture person. They construct their portfolio. They come up with a strategy and they execute on it and they do what they say they're going to do. And it doesn't cost them that much. For example, a lot of them, they may rarely lead deals. They tend to follow and they tend to take some LP positions. And, no matter really the performance of the CVC portfolio, they make all the connections and make all the learnings, that they wanted to. And more often than not, they do get a line on some really interesting acquisition targets, or the equity becomes incredibly valuable in and of itself.
Did you take strategic corporate money in Soylent?
We did not, but I did take some for the fund.
So what are the big companies today in the space? We talk about Soylent, Memphis Meats, Beyond Meat. What are some of the other big companies today? And then I want to ask, we come to this episode 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what are the big companies we'll be talking about then? maybe they don't exist today, or maybe they're small today. How do we think about that?
I mean, in the synthetic biology space overall, Twist Bioscience is, I think, an incredible example, in a great IPO, and continuing to innovate and continuing to grow. Synthetic biology being a relatively new industry that I think is a very significant IPO and a big cornerstone of the future of the industry. Specifically in the food space, Beyond Meat obviously just blew everyone out of the water, just blew everyone's expectations. And a lot of the kind of more traditional tech software oriented plays or marketplace plays maybe, kind of underperformed, frankly, by the time they made it to Wall Street. And the fact that Beyond Meat, just skyrocketed and twisted so well. And even in the private side, Martech, algae company getting acquired by DSM for over $1 billion. Climate Corporation got acquired by Monsanto, over $1 billion. Not all these are consumer facing businesses, or not all consumer brands, but they're very innovative, and they reached the market relatively quickly, and they had enormous exits.
Yeah, and places like Ginkgo Bioworks, again, on the private side, that have raised a ton of capital and are showing a ton of promise to be the next Twist potential out there, and recently just spun off their food initiative called Motif Foodworks, Motif Food Ingredients, with over $100 million in financing day one, or roughly day one. Big push into food. And we think that there's a lot of potential in what they're promoting because it has that ability to really revolutionize the game in terms of food production and ingredient production. I'd also say things like Pivot Bio,
sure.
and things like that are working on the agricultural side. Mammoth Biosciences. I mean, there's a ton of companies out there right now. They're doing Caribou, right? And ton of companies are doing bioscience based work that is going to have massive impact. And they're taking massive rounds of financing. Now, the question is that massive rounds of financing going to turn into a profitable, productive business? And I think we're seeing now a new market come after, the spate of potential IPOs with no profitable outcome, which is, I think biosciences will have to grow up too, and all the spend will have to then yield products and services like Twist that the market will appreciate, once public. And so I think we're at that pivot point where we have all these companies that are well funded, that have high expectations, and now they need to prove there's huge market opportunity. They're expanding, they're growing in the ways that will allow us to improve certain different aspects of our industry, and ultimately, ideally, will be public market darlings, because I think that, to Rob's point about rising all tides, that will rise all tides. Is when the biotech investors start to see those exits and those opportunities, then the whole industry will keep going. I think the inverse is what happened to the clean tech world, which was the companies had such lofty goals and they couldn't really achieve them. And they were beset by a lot of both scientific and technical challenges, as well as economic, obviously number one being economic challenges in that industry. And that's my biggest fear, is that we have so much potential for these companies, but some of them are going to spaces where there's clear scientific hurdles that have yet to be overcome. And I love the clean meat industry. I love the cell ag industry, or what they're calling now cultured meat. But there's some real scientific hurdles that have yet to be overcome to do this at scale. And so we can't let our overexuberance forget that there are basics for running a business, which is you have to produce product at a price point that people buy it, and you have to do it at scale such that enough of that product goes out of the door, right?
Well, I think it's important to see ag tech as clean tech. Agriculture is one of the largest polluters, and it's something that is essential to survival. We're going to need it. And I think clean tech was so tough because it was going after something like energy. It was going after a utility. That's really tough. It's kind of starting from the bottom in terms of pricing. And then, food is interesting because it has such scale, but there's plenty of room for margin. You can run a great business if you have an innovation in agriculture today.
I like what you said, which is we need to think about this as clean tech, because I think a lot of people are looking at innovations in the food system to be what I would call a twofer. You get the great thing for humans and you get the great thing for the planet at the same time, ideally nutrition and
you can run a great business too.
But I think if you look at like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, who I love both those companies, I eat their products fairly regularly. Everybody is coming down on them on their nutritional content and ignoring the benefit for the planet by moving off of, unsustainable, protein production.
Well, overall, I think, if you're making a product, if you're a founder, it's really important to keep in mind the benefit that you can confer to the environment, but to grow the business, especially in early days, you have to do something for the consumer.
Right.
If the only benefit of your product is environmental, that's great, but it's going to be tough, especially if it's also a little pricier. It's really hard to sell people only on sustainability. You have to have a product that does something for them, whether it's more nutrition, lower cost, tastes better, tastes different, better. So I think a great target right now might be something like shelf life. We throw away a lot of food. It's not good for anyone's bottom line, and it's certainly not good for the environment.
Well, and that's the thing was, previously in our previous food system, shelf life enhancement was predicated by adding more chemicals to your product. And I think what we're getting to is there's a world where you can get shelf life without sacrificing, the use of good products to help you get there, right? Like, again, I'll go back to a peel, using food waste to actually create edible peels that, stave off, the spoilage of product. Yeah. Like, we're now unlocking the potential to do multiple things, but without the negative connotations.
Well, I hope that, consumers will keep an open mind too. Not all chemicals are bad. We definitely need to test this stuff very rigorously, and, regulators need to keep up. I think by and large, they're doing a fine job. But, new things can be scary to customers. And I think that it's kind of the job of industry and innovators to explain it in a way that makes sense and let them decide for themselves. For example, personally, I think food irradiation is an amazing technology. I can definitely see why people are skeptical about it and maybe even a little afraid of it. But I think it's as simple as explaining the difference between radioactive and irradiated. It's totally different.
Why don't you explain what irradiated food is?
So if you walked outside today, you were irradiated. You were hit by sunlight and you were hit by radiation and you're still fine. Radioactive, then you would not be having a good day if you were radioactive. So radioactive means you are actually there's a form of radioactive decay, and alpha particles or beta particles, which are really, really bad because they can break your DNA bonds. Is happening. Radioactive is a very bad thing. And if you see a sign that something is radioactive, you should definitely go away. But if you see a sign that something is irradiated, that is totally different. You put something in the microwave. It was irradiated. And guess what? Now it's better. Now it's warmer. Now it killed some stuff. And food irradiation, it made a huge impact in the produce industry. It was a revolution, in terms of shelf life of produce, but there was a lot of consumer confusion around radiation. And, to this day, there's a lot of pressure against it. And really, I think that technology probably isn't the best today. It's very complicated. You need a ton of very expensive, cumbersome, equipment. And, the factories themselves are dealing with radioactive substances. So it's not a slam dunk by any means, but, I think that we run into this a lot in terms of, are preservatives scary? Is a GMO a bad thing or a good thing? These are really important conversations to have. And I think we shouldn't just dismiss something because it's new, or we especially shouldn't dismiss something because we don't understand it at first glance. And we need to see technology as a tool. And yeah, you could make a GMO that's probably not a very good thing for the environment or humans. But in fact, I think GMOs are a great thing for the environment and a great thing for human. We use fewer pesticides. We use fewer natural resources to grow them. We have less spoilage, more nutrition. The GMOs that are on the market today, I think, are a revolution in sustainability and human health.
But I think what you hit on something that's really important that I want to underscore for the podcasters, the people listening, which is consumer perception of some of these terms. And I think it goes both ways. I think it's on the science side, but I also think it's on the organic and natural side, which is people equate the terms like organic with healthy. And it has actually no relationship whatsoever. It's not been proven that organic products are necessarily that much healthier.
It's healthy for the margins of the liars.
Exactly. Well, and I would say it requires some oversight that I don't think consumers understand, which is that agricultural practices that go organic are more expensive to go through. And so by saying that, you're saying, well, I want this product. I don't know why I want it. I think it's healthy, or I think it's this. And so it's really dealing with the consumer perception around these terms. And by the way, the term natural, if you see it on any label, it's not regulated. People can put natural on whatever they want. There's no government standard for what the term natural
You can also eat all natural rat poison. It's not going to be good for you.
Exactly. As the same way that you can GMO a Twinkie, right? Yeah. things like that. So I think all these terms, I think, have some level of consumer misunderstanding. And one of my concerns, or one of the things that we need to get better at as an industry, is helping consumers understand what's good for them and good for the planet. And I think, look, our community right now is not doing anything to help the industry because everybody's very against each other. The organic movement is against the GMO movement. The GMO movement is trying to provide scientific basis and background for what they're doing, and that there's that it's healthy and that there's no necessarily unintended consequence. I don't think either side is actually listening, though. I think they're stuck in their ways. And so one of the things that I hope we can do as proponents for the good food movement is just bring everybody to the table. Because I think that in our model, in FTW's model, 1 + 1 should equal 3. If we get the best food people in the world and we get the best scientists in the world, they can solve just about any problem. It's the problem when they're sitting on other sides of the table and they don't want to move off of their thoughts. And so I remember going to an event at a very, very prestigious location. It was a very private event, top like food manufacturers and big thinkers in the food movement. And I'm sitting across from someone who has a multi-billion-dollar food consortium. And I go, I do food science and food technology. And they go, oh, you build Frankenfoods. And I go, no, you use a mobile phone and a computer to like run your operation, right? Like, why aren't you using more technologies or more solutions to make your operation better? I'm like, it's not an either or, it's an and.
Exactly.
problem.
I like to think about other industries if, you applied that same logic. Like imagine, if there were two types of banks. There were the organic banks that did everything with pencil and paper. And there were the Frankenbanks that used computers. And there were even the ultra scary banks that used the blockchain. And, what if the consumer's like, oh, I only bank organic, but my bank lost my money. Oops. Because they couldn't keep track of all the things because they were using this old technology. It's insane that we would kind of pressure an industry to use the technology of the past simply for the sake of tradition.
But there's nothing stopping us from using the science and technology to make organic food production better, right? And cheaper and easier. If that's what consumers want, how do we improve that industry? And so I constantly get into these battles of like, I'm not out there just trying to make meat in a lab. Like that's one avenue to improve the food system. There's so many other avenues. I think people forget to think of this thing as a system. It actually works from end to end, from creation to consumption. And they forget to see that there's all these little pathways and problems that we may need to take a little diversion from our current norm to get to a better world. And it may involve them being a participant and not railing against these things. And so GMOs is a great example. I mean, you took GMOs head on and put it in your marketing for Soylent. And that was I assume a very conscious effort.
It led to a better product.
Yeah. And so what was the origination of that conversation? Because how do we think about that becoming a new norm of people taking the risks and having that conversation?
Because I felt the wrong thing was happening. I saw a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that was taking place for the sake of profit. And I thought that was wrong.
Just zooming out for a sec. Where is there too few dollars going and where is there too much money going? Like what is underrated or underinvested or underexplored? What is overhyped? We should redirect attention and capital elsewhere.
Well, while we're zooming out, I think that, a lot of startups focus on products themselves. And I think it's really great that people are focused on physical products and consumable products and, moving atoms rather than just bits. I think that the digital revolution was amazing, but frankly, I think that a lot of that has conferred the free flow of information, and that allows us to more efficiently focus on technology that really matters. And a big one of those is food. And so we need new food products. We need new ingredients, but, I think a lot of what's holding back the food system is also kind of some of these behind the scenes players like the distributors, retailers, food processors. There's a lot that goes into all this. And
what are they doing that's holding things back?
Same as, other industries just kind of, they have their ironclad contracts or their ways of doing things, or they're just kind of, dug in and, not necessarily on the consumer side and very resistant to change and innovation. And, in terms of just opportunities in the food space, I wouldn't just look at the product on the grocery store shelf, look at the shelf, look at the grocer, look at where the grocer bought those products, look at how they moved those products. It really kills me that of that product on the grocery store shelf, roughly 10% of that price is the ingredients. That is 90% chance to me. All those dollars went somewhere that is not going to the health of that buyer.
Marketing and brand building, right? A lot of spend in that thing. I think to bubble that up to one term that we use a lot, which is asymmetric access to data. And so the retailers today have a huge amount of information that they don't share with their manufacturers or food producers, and they don't collect it. And so they don't know that a mother of 3, 42 years old has come in and has picked a bottle of Soylent or a Soylent bar or things like that off the shelf, looked at it and then put it down, right? And when we talk about digitizing the food system overall, we're collecting that information, and that information has yet to freely flow between all the players. And so if you're a major food manufacturer or a new food manufacturer, you don't know how to put your product on the store shelf and get your highest value dollar. You have to spend with them, marketing, end cap placement and things like that. I'm sure all these things that you guys went through.
Don't get me started on end caps.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are all, I think, scourges of the industry because of the way the industry grew up. And now we're trying to tear down those walls. And so one of the things that a large food manufacturer said to me is like, when I put a piece of fruit or a vegetable on a ship from South America to the US, I want to know where it's going to get its highest dollar before I put it on that ship, because the second I put it on that ship, it's committed. And so they're using old antiquated information resources to get that data and predict where they should put that product. And I'm like, well, that's the huge value of having all this data and analytics in the system. And if you can't get out to the data, you can't analyze it, and you can't report back in a meaningful way, then it's going to hinder the whole industry figuring these things out. The outcropping of some of these creates a ton of problems. It's not just lost revenue potential because someone sold it for 80 cents versus $1. It's no, it was wasted in transport because some issue cropped up, like a big storm in the Pacific, waylaid this ship and you lost product and things like that. And so avoiding things like food waste is probably one of our most underrated and undervalued problems right now. Some people will say, I don't have the stats kind of at my hand, but to feed 10 billion people on the planet, we really don't need productivity. We just need to get the wasted food, 1/3 or 40% of the food that we produce, obviously increase productivity, but get that food back into the market, right? And it's like, it's unconscionable to me that we're not doing more to solve that problem, especially when people are macro and micronutrient deficient and there are people going hungry, even in America. We can throw a stone out here in San Francisco and probably find someone that doesn't have their current complement of protein and the nutritional composition. And I know that was what Soylent was trying to do, was provide protein and nutrition for all, right? At the end of the day.
It also has a long shelf life.
And it has a long shelf life. And so like, there's not only the US problem of making good food for rich people and people that can spend for organic and things like that. It's literally just solving the fact that there are still huge gaps in what people have access to and that there's so much wasted that could have been used. And so we look at the idea of how do we reduce data inaccuracy and data asymmetry so that all the players in the space can work on the same platform and understand what they need to do to put good product in the market. I think also the other big trend that we're seeing is circumventing traditional retail and going direct to the consumer. I mean, you guys, again, pioneered this, which is the internet is a great democratizer, right? Anybody can reach someone and reach someone much more directly than you can by putting something on a store shelf. And so having that relationship with the customer also means you get data and the potential to sell them a subscription to your product. And so there's all these added benefits when we start thinking about food as something that can be digitized. We can collect information on it. We can share that information, and the users will benefit by having access to more product than a conventional store would hold. I mean, I think we're still waiting for the Amazon of food, even though Amazon is trying to become the Amazon of food.
Amazon sells a lot of food.
Where anybody can launch their own products, get it to market, get it to consumers, find their audience. But we're still seeing things like Thrive Market. And I was just talking to the milk guys that we're doing vegan foods, but are expanding beyond that, very rapidly.
By the way, in most countries, Amazon does not have the monopoly that it does in the US. Like in the UK, there are online grocery stores that do very, very, very well.
Yeah. And they are moving more digitally native just in general when new companies start up, because the whole millennial and next generation movement is so tethered to their devices. And so we talk a lot to the grocers outside of the US. Specifically, we're talking to grocers in Japan and Canada and other regions where it's like, no, we assume people are going to come in. If you've ever seen, I don't know if you've ever seen Hema, the Alibaba grocery stores in China, fully digitized. You literally go in and scan QR codes. You don't have to pick up any product, and they literally have these bags flying overhead that are collecting your stuff. I mean, it's like Wonderland.
I mean, the original grocery stores in the US were full service. Yeah. That was the default. You would go to the grocer with a list, and the grocer would go to all the shelves, gather all of your goods, and give it to you. You would stand still. It was an innovation to basically cut costs, and have bigger footprint stores. A lot of it was pioneered by Piggly Wiggly, very innovative company, if you didn't know, which was then copied by Walmart, Sam Walton. So I think maybe, going back to that a little bit, this concierge food provider. But again, food is a natural product. Yeah. There's a lot of variation, and I think a lot of people are probably going to be hesitant to buy something like produce on an app. It's not like an iPhone where everyone is basically the same. A lot of people are going to want to see and feel and touch these products, but I also think there's so many products. I mean, it's just like such a bloat of SKUs. I kind of think, in the future, do we think that it's going to, the stores are going to be more Walmart, like hundreds of thousands of SKUs, or more like Costco. And personally, I think there's going to be a bit of a flight to quality and cost, that a lot of those lower quality SKUs people just really don't need. Right. And retailers should think about really, really carefully before every SKU that they add.
Well, going back to your point about AWS for the food system, like not just in the synthetic biology side, but AWS for the supply chain is another big thing. Like Flexport comes around and it reinvents, shipping and logistics, for a lot of, what's going on in the world. But when we talk about the food system, there's complexities with building a food company that are beyond just, like you say, putting a consumer product like on a shelf, right? If you're making an ice cream, you have to have cold chain management. And so how do you keep that thing cold from manufacturing to the consumer's home? And those things still are yet to be pioneered. We know of a Skunkworks project that's by some very, very famous founders that are building cold chain management to rival UPS, basically. And you'll have these freezer trucks running around the city that hopefully one day will be autonomous as well. And so like the great thing is the food world also steals technologies from all the other areas. Like I think what was it? The first self-driving internal truck movement was moving beer or something like that. Or like, I remember I was like, yes, we move a ton of food products every single day. And so like all these technologies that are on the cutting edge will also hopefully benefit the food industry. But that whole supply chain, the whole infrastructure is currently able to be rethought and has to be rethought.
Yeah. Look at the infrastructure. I mean, Budweiser became Budweiser not because of the beer, but their logistics.
That's right.
They pioneered, they had the best train cars. They had these refrigerated train cars. And so they could move consistent beer farther and better and cheaper. And they won not because of the beer, but because of the distribution. And I think similarly, we should look not just at, what's in the truck, but the truck. Someone invented a better, a better refrigerator, a better compressor. I'm really into.
Oh, I just saw lower power refrigerator.
I think that'll be enormous. Look at air conditioning.
Because they're running 24/7 at all these facilities.
Freezing, air conditioning. Like these are the big ones.
They're huge infrastructure spends and energy and cost. And it's like, I think we forget that this industry does consume a lot of resources, but has a lot of efficiencies yet to gain from technology. Going back to your point though, overinvested, I would agree with Rob on the idea that packaged goods. Like I get so many packaged good pitches in my inbox and like they go like nobody's business because everybody wants to be in the next Beyond Meat business. And I'm like, that's cool and all, but we don't need the 50th jerky company or 20th bottled water company. I mean, like there's a bottled water with caffeine company I saw at an event last year. And I was like, is there a market for this? And do we yet need to expand that shelf to a million things? Maybe there is a niche market. I don't know. But it's like, is that where all of our energy, time, and money needs to go right now? Or do we need to rethink like what is coming from water and how do we get water to more places and how do we do the packaging for water? Like, is there other things around some of these massive categories? I think that's where the CPG companies are focused on is like they want to buy that next brand that's going to extend their line. They don't think about reinventing their line.
But for these brands, I mean, it's really hard to break through.
Yeah.
A lot of like brand, like CPG investors won't even really talk to you until you have like a million in revenue or so, which is really hard to get to.
I mean, it used to be 10.
Like, it used to be like 10. Yeah. Because there's just such a graveyard of these products. It didn't go so far. And it could be whatever reason. It could be timing. Maybe they launched at the wrong season. Maybe they didn't make the right pitch to the right grocery buyer at the same time. It's really hard to break through in these consumer brands. I mean, there is always an angle and I think it's definitely worth going after, but if you're more of a scientist, innovation, deep tech person, look at the ingredients, look at the packaging, look at the manufacturing. I mean, these big CPG companies are probably looking for, Soylent wouldn't have been possible without aseptic manufacturing. It's a relatively new technique. If we were processing it like the way people process milk, it never would have happened, So something like using focused microwave instead of steam in these facilities. I mean, which I'm sure you would believe these old food factories are not, space age. I mean, they're everything from.
I mean, we're not at the jungle situation right now.
No,
thankfully.
It's not that bad. Yeah. But there's still definitely a lot of room. I mean, that has difficulties too. It's tough to sell to a plant manager. He has his line and he probably doesn't want to change it. But, the companies themselves, this is the sort of thing they're looking out for, manufacturing technology.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Please hit us up at villageglobal.vc/network catalyst.